Here in the media center, bang in the middle of Rabaa Al Awdiya Square, the new heart of the new rebellion, the new revolution in Egypt. It's buzzing with life. There are thousands and thousands of pro-Morsi supporters here protesting, demanding the reinstatement of what they call is their legitimately democratically elected president, democratically elected government. And joining me now for more on this is a face that you've probably seen globally, the spokesperson of the Muslim Brotherhood, Jihad Al-Halal. Thank you very much for taking all the time. I know you're extremely busy. How, to begin with, and what do you know of the condition of President Morsi, his close supporters, among them whom is your very own father?
That's true. They've been held incommunicado for the past almost 24 days now, and there have been a few phone calls from some of the presidential team, but they lasted a couple of minutes short, and they were for requests for clean clothes. But apart from that, we don't know where they're being held, and we don't know how they're being treated, and the military has been silent on that.
But that's officially. What about unofficially?
That's unofficially, actually. There's no official communication at all.
All right. Now, let's talk about what's happened, and we can't ignore the elephant in the room, so to speak. The last few days of President Morsi being in power, there were a lot of clear signals from the army, a lot of clear signals from the people on the street. Why were those signals ignored?
The army has no right to send signals. The army operates only under the commander-in-chief, which is the President Mohamed Morsi himself. The army personnel can voice their concerns, their opinions to the president, but they are seen within individual personal context. The army itself is a machine of the state. It has no right to be a political actor or even a mediator.
And what about the millions of people who are out on the streets across Egypt?
Well, the numbers are still in question, but even yet, if Egypt is divided, this president has been elected by 52%. 48% didn't elect him. That doesn't give anyone the right to go brush up to the military in fear of electoral processes and ask the military to take their side, literally. What we were calling for is the power of the ballot of the box. This is how people express their opinions, not by a single group, and certainly not through brushing up to the military to cover up failure at the ballot box.
Fair enough, but along with democracy and being a democratically elected government comes responsibility to listen to the people and respond in time. Is it not equally the responsibility of the government, of President Morsi's government, that things came to such a pass? If he wanted, it could have been prevented, and he would still have been in power.
That's an argument that has been made, and it is true. But the reality of the situation is we have a president who is heading the executive arm of the state, who needs a parliament, a centerpiece of any democratic system that allows for representation of the different streams of ideologies and political currents in this country, and at the same time questions, scrutinizes, and even course corrects the executive power's decisions and directions. This didn't happen. We did not have a parliament in Egypt because the military council that was ruling throughout the transition destroyed it. The president tried through 4 different occurrences to re-establish the parliament or issue a new law for it to be elected. And in almost every occurrence, the old Mubarak-appointed judiciary stood against him and derailed the process, unfortunately with the support of some opposition figures. So I would definitely not defend the performance of the presidency. This is the first year of democracy. It's nascent, it's newly born, there are abundances of mistakes. But you don't change the rules of the game.
You don't change the rules of the game, fine, but you do admit that perhaps there is a realization now growing within the top leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood, within the top leadership of what was the government till the army stepped in, that perhaps if they had a chance, they would have done things differently.
We don't think that way. At the end of the day, the system itself has the checks and balances that would govern the process. This is an elected president. The leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood only represents the Muslim Brotherhood. If they thought that policies should be implemented differently, they would argue that to the president. But the president still has the last choice because he's the one who has the votes of the people behind him. No one else in the country does. And unless we have a parliament that can pressure the president or change his direction, no one else can force the president to do anything. And that was the reality of the situation in Egypt. And what we were calling for is to have a parliament election, and that's exactly the roadmap that the president, before his ouster, promised. And
But it wasn't announced. But it wasn't announced. If he wanted, it could have been announced.
it was actually announced by the president 3 days before the ouster in a national public address. The same roadmap that's now being pushed through by the military. The only difference is that this is an elected president. It's on constitutional, legitimate grounds, while the other one is on top of the tank.
Egypt has been a nation divided, let's face it. Before the elections, just about 51%, 52, so you claim, is what President Morsi came in by. But wasn't it incumbent upon a democratically elected president to then unite the country?
Absolutely. And in fact, he had about 27 tries of that uniting. He invited the opposition figures to first take responsibility in government. And their response was, Egypt's too much of a fireball now. We'd rather see you get burned holding it than be burnt with you. So they declined leading the government. They declined taking responsibility in the government. So the president, in order to protect the promise made in the Fairmont Agreement, had to resort to the bureaucracy of the state itself, to choose a bureaucrat from the state to lead the government, and to choose bureaucrats from the state to have a technocrat government with less than 10 members of the Muslim Brotherhood in a 38-member government. Then, throughout the year, through 27 different dialogue sessions, he invited, once and time again, leaders of the opposition to come to dialogue sessions on policy discussions. And not once did they show up. In his last address, he told them, I'm ready to come to your dialogue table if you invite me. And they didn't. This was a coup orchestrated, not because they didn't like the president, because they didn't like the choices of the people at the ballot box, because they failed repetitively at the ballot box. They went brushing to the army so that the power of the gun can push the ballot box out of the picture.
How then do you explain the millions and millions of people, average Egyptians, rich, poor, irrespective of their religion or their caste, come out and ask for President Morsi to go? How do you explain that?
The numbers are still in question, substantially, ranging
But they can't be ignored.
They can't be ignored, but to correct the context, from 600,000 to about over 1 million. But even that doesn't give anyone the right to deal with the numbers, because everyone knows the number of the Islamic current and stream in Egypt is far greater than any of the other currents. But yet again, we still coincide that it's the ballot box that tells the deal and not the numbers on the ground. The expressions are real. There were a lot of citizens that felt aggravated because the level of services promised by the government were not delivered. And they have the right to
So you do accept that?
Of course. And of course, these were coupled with genuine opposition streams that did not find representation in policy discussions because their leaders are not showing up and they don't have a parliament through which MPs can represent them. So all of these are legitimate concerns, but they don't substitute the fact that this is an elected president, and certainly don't allow for a military coup to take place. What should have happened is a parliament should have been elected. We then have representatives of the people, and they could have had anything to do, even ask the president to step down.
But again, coming back to that, it was the announcement of a roadmap, not the declaration of a date of elections. It was the announcement of a roadmap that was made. And if the president had wanted, perhaps he could have done so and still continued, still ensured that the Muslim Brotherhood would have continued into the next elections and perhaps not have been at this point in stage.
It was never about the president continuing. It was never about the Muslim Brotherhood even having a role. It's about the sovereignty of the people of Egypt, and no one has the right to challenge that sovereignty, not even its own army. And that was the equation here. That was what at stake. The president has the full power to either choose to do something or not choose to do it. The only ones that can pressure the president to do anything are the people themselves. And the people speak through two channels: indirectly through their elected officials or directly through the ballot box.
Or also directly on the streets of Egypt, as they did.
They don't speak as the people of Egypt. They speak as groups and segments of the people of Egypt. And it's very easy to combine all of them, not wanting a character. But once you're faced with the responsibility of choice, they quarrel, exactly like we did when we together removed Mubarak out of the picture, and once a choice was given, we quarreled over who we wanted in his stead.
Do you feel sad today personally to see just how deeply divided your country is?
I do, and I thought that we would never come to this point. But since we did, I think now it's not about who's at stake in the game. It's about sticking to principle and making sure that we should never allow the military to take on a political role in Egypt again. We allowed it twice before, and we plunged the country into 60 years of military dictatorships.
It's interesting you say that, because that would also entail the Muslim Brotherhood looking at the possibility of changing its tactics if it has to continue politically in the Egyptian scenario. And that would also entail perhaps listening more to the liberalists.
I don't think it entails that, because they've similarly failed at every electoral test, and they don't have the democratic knowledge to engage in the parliamentary system yet. I think
that's also a factor of just how badly organized they are.
I think what it entails is that we should have listened to the revolutionary youth of January 25th revolution, because they carried the revolutionary spirit of reform that requested the political leaders to actually demolish everything else beyond that in the Mubarak old corrupt state and build a new proper sustainable democracy. Yes, this is something that's being reviewed now, and it is a mistake that we acknowledge, because the president has chosen to believe that a self-correcting mechanism installed into a system would then establish the needed reforms, and that choice has failed, unfortunately.
Yes. And talking about reforms, it was a great opportunity for President Mohamed Morsi's government to ensure that you've got over 50% of youth in Egypt. There are issues of unemployment, of education, of healthcare, of livelihoods, of aspirations. This is a very aspirational society, and that is something perhaps which turned out to be his biggest shortcoming in governance.
That's true. It's a bureaucracy built, 7 million strong bureaucracy built over decades of oppression and corruption. It's a very badly inefficient machine. Regardless of how professional or even how enlightened or how aspiring the leader you install on top of it, he comes with a vision. The delivery machine is the bureaucracy itself. If you bring a professional Formula 1 racer into a car that's got 4 flat tires, no engine, no steering wheel and no tank, it's not going to drive. And that's the problem that the president had to face. The bureaucracy was being given orders and not executing. And the citizens were disgruntled, but because the bureaucracy is not in the crosshair, the president is, that's where the fire was directed.
So why wasn't that conveyed to the people who were out onto the streets then?
Because the channels of conveying these messages, the private and public media, even the state media, were all anti the new regime. They were still owned, directed and coordinated by the old Mubarak regime, and it was strategically important for them to tarnish and demonize the image of any new democratic system that will take place that might and actually had started already to question the loot from the corruption that they had managed to side over for the past 30 years. And unfortunately, they succeeded in that.